Hello, as you all know, I am very interested in sharing the civics and the institutions of our great democracy with all Australians. And today I am delighted that we are sharing a story about something that happened in this room 50 years ago. We're shortly to note the anniversary of the 50th anniversary of the dismissal of Gough Whitlam by one of my predecessors, Sir John Kerr, the then Governor-General. I'm joined by Professor Anne Twomey AO, one of Australia's leading constitutional experts who's going to talk us through this. And just to give you a sense of setting, we're in the room where this happened. We're sitting in front of a chair where we think Sir John Kerr probably sat. The desk is definitely not the desk that was used at that time. The desk that was the subject of the dismissal is sitting in the Museum of Australian Democracy. But we are here in the room where it happened, and I'm delighted that Professor Twomey will join us to explain what happened on that day. So welcome, Professor Twomey. I'll say Anne.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you here, and given your extraordinary experience and your time, the time you spent looking into this very day, 11th of November, I wanted to remind people I have your wonderful reference book here, The Veiled Sceptre, which is one that anyone in my job would have nearby as a reminder of how to interpret and understand our constitutional and my role. And we're surrounded by some of the books that are here in Government House that help unpack some of the things that happened and that might come to my office at some point. So
you hope not.
I hope not, and we always prepare for that not to be the case. But I want to start by asking you to take us through what happened on the afternoon, on the day of the 11th of November 1975.
Well, the critical thing that happened was that the Governor-General, sitting over there in that chair, welcomed the Prime Minister, who came in and said, I'm going to advise you to hold a half-Senate election. He started pulling the papers out of his pocket, and the Governor-General apparently said, before you do that, let me say that you have told me that you want a half-Senate election, but you do not have supply to cover the relevant period.
Tell us what supply means, so not having supply.
Sure. So supply means the money to run the government. Yeah. So parliaments control whether and how the money that's collected by government through taxation, it all gets put into a fund, and Parliament controls whether that money comes out or not. And that's fundamental to our system of responsible government.
Yes. So
governments are responsible to Parliament, but Parliament controls the money. And that was the key thing that happened in 1975. Parliament was saying, at least the upper house was saying in the Senate, that we are going to defer dealing with supply until you, the government in the lower house, go to an election. Now, the Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, had said, no, I'm not going to go to an election. I'm not going to be forced by the Senate to go to an election, but I will hold a half-Senate election in the hope that that might alter the complexion of the Senate in the short term, because there were new territory senators that were going to come in, and therefore I might manage to get supply later. But Whitlam had intended to run the country without supply for a period of time, possibly until February the following year. And there was a general principle with Governors-General that maintaining supply is really, really important, and you don't grant a dissolution, you don't grant an election to someone unless they've got supply to cover that period.
So back in this room, Gough Whitlam has indicated he wants the half-Senate election, and the Governor-General has another course of action that he has been working on.
So he has a letter in front of him. He's already signed it, and that letter said that he would terminate the commission of Gough Whitlam to be Prime Minister, that he would appoint a caretaker government in order to secure the passage of supply in the Senate. So Malcolm Fraser would have to achieve the passage of supply in the upper house, and then requiring Fraser then to advise the Governor-General to hold an election so that the people got to decide in the end. But a very special kind of election, a double dissolution. So that meant the whole of the Senate was dissolved as well as the lower house. So the people got to decide who all the politicians were at the next election to see who got to govern.
So tell us then what happened in these moments. So it wouldn't have been a calm conversation, I'm imagining. And there's been lots written about this and speculation. And of course, there were only two people in the room that would ever be able to speak to that, actually. But lots been written about what happened here.
So they both gave an account. It's slightly different, but largely the same. So the Governor-General tells Whitlam, I'm going to terminate your commission. Here's a letter that does that. Whitlam reads the letter. So the first reaction he has is disputed. We know that first reaction concerns going back to the palace. So Whitlam says, he said, have you consulted the palace in advance? And that Kerr responded, I didn't need to, and it's too late, your commission has been terminated. Kerr, on the other hand, says that Whitlam, stood up, looked around for a telephone and said, I must contact the palace. Now, one way or another, the first thing everybody thought about was the palace and the role of the Queen. But that was actually a delusion, because the Queen, under the Constitution, does not have any direct role in terms of the dismissal of ministers or the appointment of ministers or anything, because the Constitution itself says that those powers are granted to the Governor-General.
So let's stop there for a second, because I'm often asked by people who confuse the role of the Governor-General with that of the monarchy and the Crown and the King. I wonder if you could clarify exactly constitutionally what is the role of the Governor-General, the relationship with the Crown, and how those powers come to be exercised in Australia.
Sure. So first thing to know is the Constitution tells you in Section 2 that the Governor-General is the representative of the monarch.
Yes.
And so you do have that relationship with the Crown, and it's one of communication and particularly a ceremonial role that relates to the Crown. But when it comes to the actual powers that the Governor-General exercises constitutionally, summoning and dissolving Parliament, appointing and removing ministers, that's exclusively given by the Constitution to the Governor-General. So they're Governor-General's powers. Most of the Governor-General's powers are exercised on the advice of the Prime Minister or relevant ministers because of the system of responsible government. But there are a few powers that are reserved for the Governor-General to be able to exercise discretion. What if a government does get out of control and start doing things that are unconstitutional in nature? So that discretion, however, is exclusively the discretion of the Governor-General. The palace is not involved and has no right to be involved in terms of telling the Governor-General what to do. And in 1975, when the Speaker of Parliament wrote to the Queen and said, well, what happened is terrible, can you reverse it? And the Queen said, well, our understanding of the Constitution is that those are powers for the Governor-General and it's not our role. And so that was expressly said by the palace at the time, and correctly so.
And so, to be clear, in a modern context, I'm certainly chosen by an Australian Prime Minister. The Governor-General of the day is chosen by the Australian Prime Minister, appointed by the Crown, in my case by King Charles. As you say, the King doesn't then direct me in my day-to-day activities, that I take advice and counsel from the government of the day, nor would I contact the palace to seek advice and counsel on those matters. That's not to say, though, that I don't have a good, strong, functioning relationship with His Majesty, with the King. We hosted him here in Australia just in last October with Queen Camilla. In fact, we spent time in this room with him doing various calls and meetings here in our study. And he has a deep, abiding affection for the country. He's interested in our progress and our success. And I do keep in touch with him and update on the general news of Australia. But I wouldn't, as you would say, under the rules of our Constitution, take my advice and counsel from the King. I do take my advice and counsel from the government of the day, the Prime Minister, senior ministers. We do that in many ways, but that is what's important, I think, for all Australians to know, that the office is conducted in an Australian manner, in Australian conditions, through the constitutional powers, through which the Crown's powers transfer to me under those various provisions of the Constitution. So I'm often asked about that. I hope that clarifies some of those aspects. And there is a very strong relationship, though, to the King, as all the governors of the states have, because they are similarly appointed by the Crown, and they pursue their viceregal functions in a very similar fashion to the way I do for the Commonwealth. Take us back to the day. So we've had this moment. The Prime Minister, now having had his commission terminated in this room, has left. There is someone else in this house, though. There
is. So in a bit of a mix-up from a travelling point of view, it was supposed to be that the Prime Minister Whitlam came first, left, and then the opposition leader came to be commissioned to form a government. But actually the opposition leader turned up first, so they had to store him in another room over there while the dismissal happened. But anyway, once Whitlam had left, and by the way, they did shake hands on their departure, which I think is a good sign. Then Fraser came in. Now, the Governor-General had thought through how to, given that he was doing something so shocking, which was dismissing a Prime Minister, which hadn't happened at the federal level before. There had been state ones, but not at the federal level. Given he was doing something so shocking, he also thought through, how can I make this as democratic and fair as I possibly can? So if a Governor-General is going to exercise a power of dismissal, the first thing you want to do is to make sure that it's the people who decide in the end. So you want to make sure that the people get to vote, because in the end, from a democratic point of view, they're the ones who have to decide, not you as Governor-General.
Yes.
So he said there has to be an election, but I'm going to make sure that this is a double dissolution election, because the Senate shouldn't be able to profit from forcing a government to an election with only half of it being elected and half of it continuing on. Now, the problem with that was that there had been bills that had been blocked in the upper house, and that was enough to trigger this double dissolution election under Section 57 of the Constitution. But those bills had been blocked by Fraser and his opposition. So the bizarre thing that they then had to do was to say to Fraser, well, you know these bills that you blocked in the Senate? Well, we want you to say that they are so important that they now justify holding a double dissolution, so both houses going out. And so Fraser agreed to that. There were also other conditions that he put on Fraser. So the first condition was he had to get supply.
Yes.
Because there's this fundamental principle, you need to continue supply because people suffer. If the government runs out of money, public servants don't get paid. Yeah. Grants to nursing homes and aged care people and Indigenous groups and all the rest of it, all that money stops. And so when that had happened in the past in Australia, it had happened in Victoria in the 19th century, people's mortgages were foreclosed upon. They lost their homes and all sorts of horrible things happened.
They had serious consequence to a lack of supply.
So the Governors-General since then, because the governors got sacked, a governor got sacked in Victoria and another one got demoted for allowing that kind of thing to happen, for allowing the government to continue without supply. So ever since then, governors and Governors-General have made sure you have to ensure that the supply continues, and particularly during an election period.
Yes.
So having taken into account all that and understanding that the dismissal happened because of that, the key thing that they had to do was make sure that supply was passed before an election was held.
Yes. Yep.
Now, this was absolutely critical because this is where the whole thing could have turned into a complete schmozzle. Because what happened after the dismissal was that Whitlam went home to the lodge and ate lunch. Now, this is a very surprising thing to do when you've just been dismissed, because the logical thing to do would have been to go to Parliament, and then you would have gone to the Senate and you would have dealt with the issue of supply. Yes. So if they'd not passed supply and then voted no confidence in Fraser in the lower house, there would have been an absolute pickle, because Kerr would have had to reappoint Whitlam, and because there was no supply. But
that's not what happened.
No, Whitlam didn't tell anyone in the Senate, and the Senate passed supply, and that then allowed Fraser to come back and say, right, I've had supply. There was a vote against me in the lower house. By convention, that means I either have to resign or secure an election. Yep. But you required me to pass supply and advise an election. I'm advising an election, and that's it. Election called. Fraser continues as a caretaker government until the new election.
And what felt like a crisis then reverts to why the strength of our system, because an election was called. It was held democratically, as all our elections are. Malcolm Fraser was elected by the people as the incoming Prime Minister and government, and calm was restored. So a crisis in the moment, but actually our system delivered. As you say, there might have been byways and highways that could have been followed, but that weren't. But where we ended up was, again, instability. But a lot of attention is paid to this day, the anniversary of the 11th of November. Much will be written on the day and commented on the day. I thought it was important just to get some actual facts on what happened in this room and what it meant for the future of our democracy and what it means for the Governor-General today. So a lot of people know what happened on the steps of the Parliament. A lot was covered on that day. But if I can throw you forward now to today, why does the Office of Governor-General in 2025 matter? Talk us a little bit through why our system of democracy is strong and the role the Governor-General plays in that, as far as you see it as a constitutional expert.
Well, someone once described the Governor-General as a fire extinguisher. They have the power to do things, but you don't ever want to use it. And the thing with the reserve powers, like the power to dismiss or the power to refuse a dissolution, those sort of powers, they operate by not being used. So the effectiveness of those powers lies in the fact, and that's why that book, by the way, is called The Veiled Sceptre. It's a power that you have, but it's basically veiled and covered, and no one knows quite the extent of it, But the fear that it might be exercised
Yes.
pressures people into behaving reasonably and conforming to convention and not pushing the
Yes.
boundaries. And that's exactly what a Governor-General needs to be there, to calm the temperature down, to stop people pushing the boundaries, to make sure that things happen with propriety, within the rule of law, so that laws are complied with, all of those sorts of things. And the Governor-General, to do that, needs the personal skill to be able to persuade people. It's not about hitting them over the head with a sceptre and saying, here are my powers and I'm going to exercise them. And that was one of the problems with 1975.
Yes.
It was too aggressive. There wasn't enough persuasion and influence.
Yes.
And I think we learnt a lot after 1975 because of that. So first of all, the Senate now doesn't go around saying, well, we don't like what you're doing, we're going to block supply, even though the power's still there, because people realise that that caused such a rent in the social fabric of the country that it was bad for the country. So people are more likely to pull back from the edge and just be a little bit more patient, because your time will come in an electoral sense. Leave it to the people in an election to decide, not force the boundaries and the issues. And the Governor-General plays a really important role in all of that, in terms of just, sometimes the phrase is used to encourage, advise and warn.
Yes.
And so it's about using that kind of influence to stop people pushing the edges, make sure people behave reasonably, because yes, there is a sceptre hidden underneath the veil, but you never really want to use it.
Yes.
It's about persuading people and making sure they behave sensibly.
So you've just described perfectly what I often try to describe to people who meet me in the street or come through the school tours, which is, are you going to sack the Prime Minister? And they really want to know at that moment. So hopefully what we've done today is explain the rarity both of this happening. It's happened once at the federal level in Australia. It has happened with the states previously, but at the federal level once. It's very unlikely to happen in a similar circumstance, given all you've just said. And as you've pointed out, and I say this to everybody as part of our education series of unveiling what does go on here at Government House in the role of a modern Governor-General, is that my right to be consulted, to encourage and to warn are the great influence powers of the Governor-General. And my predecessors who I met before I took on this role, those that are still living, really said that to me in great detail, that it's not the actual exercise or the threat used vociferously. It is the premise that it's there, but actually it's the consultation, it's the ability to look and see where things could go wrong, and to be a constant understander of what the government of the day is doing as the primary consultation post for the Governor-General. And that is what I do. And it means a constant awareness of what's happening in the Parliament, what's happening with the government, and having a very strong relationship, but always retaining the office of Governor-General as established under the Constitution. We might have to wrap it up there. And I don't know if you had any other thoughts you wanted to share before we do close on the stability of the Australian system, because we have our democracy through a Constitution, a Governor-General. Any final remarks? And I will remind people that just having a copy of the Constitution is always a good thing, and I'm always happy to send these out and I give these away. But an understanding of our civics and our institutions is why I talk about care being at the centre of everything I do. Not just care for each other and care for our country and care for each other in a general sense. It's deep care for our institutions and our civics. And the work that you do on your YouTube channel to unpack civics is incredibly important when we know so many people don't know that there is an Office of Governor-General or exactly how our Constitution and our government and our democracy works. But I might hand you for any final comments on the stability of our system.
Well, look, our system is remarkably stable. We've got one of the oldest constitutions in the world. I think it's certainly up there in the top 10, maybe in the top 5. We haven't changed it a lot. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it does need change. But the reality is the system does work well because people respect it. So what we really need to do is maintain respect for the Constitution, for the institutions, for the rule of law.
Yes.
And if we do that, that creates the stability that allows for economic prosperity and, society. But the key thing in all of this is not to forget. And one of the problems, I think, and a good reason for talking about 1975 and all the things that happened, is that we do often forget our constitutional history and that background. So remembering what happened is good to actually encourage us not to go down that path again. It's good for the political leaders today who can sometimes get, too much heat and passion about things, to realise that no, actually, sometimes you do need to be just a little bit more calm and reasonable and wait rather than pushing everything to its conclusion. So respect and also remembrance on Remembrance Day. Quite appropriate.
And thank you for reminding me of that. Thank you for joining us today, Professor Twomey. It's wonderful to have someone of such immense knowledge and understanding who's looked at this event from every single direction with all of the source material. So I'm really, really privileged that we've been able to spend that time with you. You mentioned what 11th of November is in Australia, other than the 50th anniversary of the dismissal. It is always, of course, Remembrance Day, where we remember those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our democracy and our peace, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And of course, on the 50th anniversary of the dismissal, I will actually be at the War Memorial paying that respect to our National Day of Remembrance, and as it should be. But I hope this has been a good counterpoint to some of the things you may see and hear about this anniversary. It is important, as you say, history matters, but so too does respect for our civics. So I hope that's helped in a little way, and I hope you continue to watch some of the things we're talking about that we do here, because it does matter. And I'm very grateful that you were here to join us today, Anne.
Thank you.